Welcome to the Mind Your Career webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rammelfinger, and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. And I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Bouncing Back, 10 Ways to Build Resilience. Today's speaker is Karen Purze, who is an MBA from 2011 from Booth, and she is an author, a blogger, and a speaker who helps people prepare for and manage life transitions. She also has the distinction of giving birth to her first child during her first semester break of the Chicago Booth Executive MBA program and finished the MBA when she was 5 months pregnant with her second child. So Karen is really one of those women who can manage it all. It is my pleasure to hand the controls over to her.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. I'm really excited to be here today. Maybe tell me, Rachel, if you could launch the first poll, we'll see where everybody's dialing in from and get a sense of where people are joining from.
The poll is launched for attendees, and we'll just give you a couple seconds to fill in your answer.
Can you still see my screen? I don't know what just happened there.
We can see the poll right now, and we have 94% of those who responded are from the Americas, 3% from Europe, and 3% from Asia.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. For those of you who are joining not just over lunch, but also over dinner or after dinner, I really appreciate it. Can you see my screen right now, Rachel? Something happened on my end here.
Yes, we can.
But is it only the slides, or is it?
Your PowerPoint, it's not in presenter mode. It's it's just PowerPoint.
Yeah, like it kicked me out. There we go. How about that?
Perfect.
All right, good. Well, great. I'll go ahead and start. I have always been fascinated by transformation stories, by stories where the underdog wins, where a challenge is overcome. And judging by American film and TV history, I'm not alone. At the heart of stories like these is resilience, the ability to bounce back and to deal with uncertainty and change. So today I'm going to talk about 10 ways to build resilience. This is a little view into my last 10 years, the last 10 years of my life. I thought my life was busy when I was at Booth until both of my parents got sick at the same time, and then it started to feel insane. In 2012, my mom had a massive stroke while my dad was in treatment for cancer. I was leading a really highly visible, high-stakes project at work, and I had 2 kids under 3 at home. And that was just the start of the changes and the challenges. Each of these red items represents a substantial change in either my life, my husband's life, or our parents. Over the last 6 years, in fact, I have taken over every aspect of my parents' legal, financial, and medical affairs, all while doing all the rest of the things that we've talked about and you see on the slide. We adjusted to each change as it came, and we either used or developed the skills to deal with it. It's a lot of bouncing back on this slide. So I have my own personal master's degree in resilience, and I'm backing it up today with additional research on the topic. I used open source materials from the American Psychological Association and additional sources to prepare this presentation, obviously in addition to my own experience and perspective. So resilience is the ability to bounce back when things don't go as planned. Psychologists have identified some of the factors that make someone resilient are a positive attitude, optimism, the ability to regulate your emotions, and the ability to see failure as a form of helpful feedback. Resilience comes from an ability to change how we perceive events and how we react to them. If you're a resilient person, that doesn't mean, though, that you don't get stressed or that you can power through anything. It means you have the skills to deal with uncertainty and change. In other words, you don't have to be resilient, you can become resilient. And I think that's great news. In the next 30 minutes or so, I'll go over 10 ways to build resilience. I'll share a bit of my story along the way. And we'll finish with some tips for managing at work if you're dealing with a personal crisis. I'd like to get a sense of if you've ever experienced a challenging situation. So Rachel, if you could launch the second poll.
The poll is up on everyone's screen and we're taking votes.
Great.
We'll just take a couple more moments to see if we have any other voters. And we can see that 73% said yes and 27% said no.
Okay, so yeah, quite a few people have managed the situation. And Rachel, just to help me remember what the question was, I wrote the questions yesterday, so I know what they are, but just remind me. So that means that they have had an event that affected them in the last year or so, correct?
Yes, in the last year.
Great. All right, so hopefully some of this will help you. Some of it will resonate. I'll go ahead and go into my top 10 here. So first and foremost, you set the foundation for resilience by taking care of your mind and your body. Keeps kicking me out of presentation mode, sorry. Take care of your mind and your body. But this isn't just about resting or exercising. It's about managing your time strategically and doing things that energize you. So this isn't about only time management, only taking care of yourself. This is about energy management. Paying attention to your feelings and your needs and doing things that energize you, like maybe that for you, that's reading a book. Maybe for you, that's learning something new. Maybe that's spending time with people, or maybe that's not spending time with people. Think about how you recharge and what is most kind of replenishing for your energy, and do that first. Foundation is take care of yourself. I love this quote. Impossible is just a word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it. Impossible is not a fact, it's an opinion. Impossible is not a declaration. Go ahead and launch the poll. I want to see if anybody knows who this quote is attributed to. Should be a way up for you guys to vote on who said this. Rachel, are you on mute? Are you reading the poll results?
Oh, I was on mute. I apologize. So we have 9% Barack Obama, 32% Muhammad Ali, 15% Angela Merkel, 44% Winston Churchill.
This was Muhammad Ali, so some of you knew that. Great. So Muhammad Ali said this, I just love this idea of looking at problems as opportunities, and it's a hallmark of resilient people. A CEO of one of the companies that I used to work for was fond of saying, engage with the opportunity, not the problem. So if you think about it, do you spend more time thinking about why something can't be done than how it can? I know I've been guilty of that. I know this is a good reminder for me and maybe for you. Engage with the opportunity. Before we continue, I do want to take 1 second and do just a reality check. I want to acknowledge that sometimes changing your attitude or reframing how you think about something is not enough. Sometimes systemic barriers are in place, as is the case with racism, with sexism, with other injustices. Take that into account when you're considering your response to challenges. You can still control your response and your emotional response to something, but other group actions may also be needed to create lasting change. So just changing your mind about something is obviously not enough in some cases. So I want to acknowledge that as part of this presentation too. Whether the barrier is systemic, professional, personal, you still need to take action. So it's important to, when faced with many options, to not get paralyzed, to not detach, to not ignore. Make a decision, whether you listen to your heart, your gut, your head, or since this is University of Chicago alumni, your decision matrix. Make a decision and set a realistic goal. Don't deny, decide. Number 4, once you have a goal, move towards it. My dad used to say that sometimes the best you can do is set your sails and wait for the wind. And I love that idea, that taking a small step right now affects the outcome, even if you can't see the results right away. So do something regularly that moves you towards your goals. Small steps lead to steady progress, which leads to confidence. And confidence builds resistance. So go towards your goals. We talk about confidence, but you might not always feel confident, and that is perfectly understandable. If you're in that situation or in times like this, I recommend reaching out across your network to friends, to family, even to professional acquaintances. This is one I need to remind myself of frequently, on a regular basis. In fact, I have this written on a Post-it next to my desk. Especially since I work by myself and for myself right now, I need to remember to reach out. Knowing that you're not alone and that people care about you can pull you through and give you hope during dark times. This doesn't mean we have to all have 40 best friends. Weak social ties are just as important as strong social ties. And research is showing that people who have a broad range of different social roles tend to be healthier and more likely to attain professional success. I actually keep a list of people that support me in my professional life, and I reach out to them and say hello, ask for advice, schedule lunch, share some news when I'm feeling isolated or discouraged. That gives me a boost of energy and encouragement so I can just get back on track or back to work. So when in doubt, reach out. Let's take a quick poll and see if any of these resonated with you, or if there's something in these suggestions for ways to build resilience that you think you might want to try out. So go ahead and launch the poll, Rachel.
So participants should see the question, which techniques that we've talked about so far do you plan to practice? Take care of yourself, engage with the opportunity, don't deny, decide, when in doubt, reach out, go towards your goals. We'll give it a couple more seconds as folks are still responding. All right, we'll share our results. So we have 18% said they're going to try taking care of yourselves. 24% engage with the opportunity. 9% don't deny, decide. 24% when in doubt, reach out. 26% go towards your goals.
Great. I'm going to take by that you're a bunch of decisive people. I love that. that you've taken some, but it's interesting to see the range of interest across the suggestions. So thanks for responding to that. Okay, great. Number 6 is sometimes your goals might need to change as your circumstances change. And as you've no doubt realized in your life so far, you can't always control your circumstances. And in these cases, a hallmark of a resilient person is to accept that. Accept that change is a part of living. That doesn't make it comfortable, and part of this is actually learning to be okay with that discomfort, sitting with it, letting it pass through, and being able to accept that as part of the experience of changing yourself. So sometimes the best response of a resilient person is to change with the changes. Number 7, we talked a minute ago about confidence and how that helps build resilience. You can develop confidence in your abilities, but also in yourself as a person, trusting that you have or you can learn the skills to overcome whatever challenge you're facing. Any U Chicago grad I've ever met knows how to learn, so that's not going to be a problem with you. This is about a little bit more than skill development. It's also about developing an ability to trust your instincts and be nice to yourself. This is something that didn't always come naturally to me. And when I realized, at one point somebody asked me if I would talk to a friend the way that I was talking to myself. And when I realized the answer was an emphatic no, I focused on changing my inner dialogue. And something interesting happened. What I discovered is that without all the static, I've become a better problem solver. So take a positive view of you. Change can be both transformative and traumatic. Maybe obvious it's sometimes that it's instinctive to focus on the traumatic initially as you determine how you're going to respond to something. But if you look, you may also be able to learn something about yourself. I've had to work through so much uncertainty in my personal life in recent years. One of the side effects of that has been a deeper sense of confidence in my own abilities. It's extended to my professional life. That's enabled me to work independently and go into essentially private practice. That's something I don't think I would have occurred to me to do before. So it's also given me a greater tolerance for uncertainty. And I wouldn't call that quite a silver lining to all of the many crises that my family has had in the past 5 or 6 years, but I'll take it. Look for learning in these experiences. Look for learning. Avoid thinking of problems as insurmountable, and look for opportunities for self-discovery. Has anyone ever heard of the 5x5 rule? I think it's more of a saying, and it's basically that if something isn't going to matter or isn't likely to matter 5 years from now, don't spend more than 5 minutes worrying about it. And I think that's a little too tidy, and I think it's easy to say that. But the bigger idea to consider your stressors in a broader context does really resonate with me, and it's something that has helped. So one technique to try when you're learning this skill is to maybe take things to the extremes. Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? And then what? And then what? You can take that a couple steps past that first, what's the worst that could happen? And it's sort of like teaching yourself optimism by thinking pessimistically. And it sounds crazy, but if you try this exercise, you might be surprised by what comes out of your mouth and what you learn from that. Another good trick here is to get outside. I like to get as close as I can to a horizon, maybe the top of a mountain or beside a lake here in Chicago, and watch my concerns shrink in the face of the sun, the moon, the sky. Whatever works for you, find a way to keep things in perspective and avoid trying to blow things out of proportion. Number 10 is about maintaining a hopeful outlook. That's an important resilience skill, is maintaining hope in the face of challenges. And the technique here is to visualize what you want rather than what you're worried about or what you fear. So believing in a different future can help pull you through a challenging present. Now, thinking good thoughts doesn't make them any more likely to happen than thinking bad thoughts make bad things likely to happen. But it does, however, make a big difference in your state of mind and for your well-being to have a positive outlook. It may also allow you to see possibilities that weren't immediately obvious when you were stuck in fear. So expect good things is another skill that you can teach yourself. When you launch the poll, let's see out of these 5 what resonated with people.
All right, so we have 5 options. You can select more than one. Change with the changes, keep things in perspective, look for learning, take a positive view of yourself, expect great things. We can see our results. We have 30% of folks said that they want to change with the changes. 41% are going to try keeping things in perspective. 35% look for learning. Another 35% take a positive view of yourself. 38% expect great things.
Great. Thank you. Wonderful. I think before I launch into the next piece, I actually want to go straight to the next poll. So go ahead and launch the next poll, and then I'll go back to presenter mode.
The votes are in. We have 91% saying yes, and only 9% saying no for has a personal event ever affected you professionally.
Okay, good to know. That explains, I think, it seems like we've got the right target audience based on the description. So I'll talk a little bit about a situation that happened with me. So I talked earlier, my mom had a stroke. This was at a time when I was leading a team of over 100 people, and as I mentioned, I had young children at home. A lot of kind of high pressure things going on, independent of the health event that really just changed my mom's life from one second to the next. It was a major stroke. It was a brain aneurysm that she was lucky to survive, and we knew pretty quickly that the recovery was going to be intense and that the family was going to be a critical part of success in her recovery. Just thinking about how I was going to participate in that and manage the already high pressure job that I had, it basically gave me heart palpitations immediately, like blood pressure just went crazy. So I knew pretty quickly that I was going to need to do something really deliberate to manage this balance between work and caring for my mom and being a part of this recovery. So one of the first things that I recommend is think about what you want. That maybe you can't think of a way to manage work and your personal crisis. In those situations, it may be possible to take a leave of absence or take advantage of family medical leave, depending on what the situation is. In my case, what I was looking for was a modified schedule. So you might ask for a modified schedule. You might ask to work from home more often. Think about what will help relieve the pressure for you and make a substantial difference in your ability to manage the crisis and manage work. So think about what you want as first. The second is doing your research. So identifying at work if there's been a precedent for the type of request you want to make, understanding what the policies are that are written in place. Maybe this is about having a conversation with HR before you talk with a supervisor. Doing your research about the policies and precedents is part of it. And then taking all those things together to make a proposal, a formal proposal for what you want, so that you can make a specific ask. That's going to increase your chances of getting what you want. one of the goals is to get this out in the open. And here I don't mean wide open. I mean that the people that one are in the best ability to have the best ability to support you know enough about what's going on that they can help you make an appropriate plan. And and then it's up to you to decide who else knows. It may be helpful to tell certain coworkers that you may rely on if you have a sudden absence, or if you expect to be out. Say you're in treatment for your own illness and you expect to have to miss some work. You may need to tell some people what's going on, but you don't have to share details, just how it will impact them and what kind of support you need from them. So getting it out in the open will be a relief to you. And if it's something that you have been hiding or not sharing, it may be showing up in your work whether you realize that or not. So there is a certain relief that comes with having this conversation, although it can be potentially nerve-wracking to bring these kinds of personal situations up at work. You don't have to share a ton of detail, and you don't have to share it with everyone. But that's the main point. Sort of getting it out in the open will help. It'll help you get the support you need. It'll also be a relief to you in many ways, I think. Another purpose of this conversation is to make a backup plan so that if you're suddenly out, or if you're out for a prolonged period, or if you expect to be out, there is a plan in place for how people can cover the work that you would normally do. They know where your files are. They know who your main contacts are for certain portions of your work. So making introductions if necessary, making some training tasks, documenting some of your procedures if necessary, so that if you have an absence, whether it's planned or unplanned, that there is an infrastructure in place to deal with it that doesn't kind of put the bad feelings back on you if you've put someone else in a bind. So making a backup plan is an important part of this. And then I mentioned this earlier, asking for support, ask for specific support. I asked to take every Friday off for 3 months for the whole summer. And at the end of that, I think I asked for another month, and it worked out. And I did. So I feel like I was lucky there. It may not be always the case, but if you don't ask for what you want, there's zero chance of you getting it. So start that conversation around don't start from a position of compromise. That's my negotiating tip. Start with ask for what you want, and then back up from there if you need to, and make some alternate arrangements. But that support can take the form of, as I said, time. It can also take the form of additional help. Maybe that also is outside help through an employee assistance program. I know my company didn't offer it, but I know it would have helped me if I was able to contact a professional that had experience in dealing with aging issues, or maybe a geriatric care manager, something like that would have helped. I know some companies do provide that. So look into what types of benefits are available. Underutilized benefits is actually a really big problem for employers. They find that people aren't using benefits or don't know about benefits that are available to them. So ask, that's one. And then the other thing here you want to do in this conversation is reaffirm your commitment to the company, to the job. Let people know that if your performance has slipped, acknowledge that it has slipped, confirm that you expect it to be temporary, and share what you're doing to address whatever the situation is. So you want your supervisor to come out of that conversation feeling empathy for you, knowing that they have a role in supporting you, and knowing that you are committed to getting past this and recovering your performance if it's suffered in the process here. So those are my tips for having these really important conversations with coworkers. This might be a good time to stop for questions. Does anyone have any? I've also had these kinds of conversations with more than one manager at more than one company. So if anybody has any questions, now it might be a good time to take some if there are any.
If you have questions, if you could please write them in the box.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move on. If one comes in, we can circle back to it.
We've had a couple. It usually takes a minute. Folks have to type them in. Can you please give some examples on change with the changes? Saying more a little bit about that.
Change with the changes. Well, I think I could think of several situations in my professional life where, maybe there's a reorganization of the management at work, and maybe they ask you to take a different role. That's a case where you may be able to influence the outcome and you may not. And if you can't, it is important to accept that change and kind of roll with it and move on. In my personal life, these health changes with my parents changed their whole world. It changed their personality in some ways. And while you might want to that doesn't mean you have to be happy about it, but there is a point of acceptance that you have to come to, and therefore, and that acceptance is important to then making whatever adjustments in your life or in their life, in my case, to support them. So accepting that my mom, for example, was not going to recover the use of her right arm. That was something that was hard for her to accept. It was hard for us to accept. But in order for her to live safely at home, we had to make certain adjustments based on the acceptance that there wasn't going to be the progress we'd hoped for there. So there's some examples both personally and professionally where I've had to change with the changes, change my goals or change my approach.
Can you expand on the backup plan component of preparing to have a critical conversation?
Sure. Let me try and go back. What I mean by backup plan is like an emergency plan. Like if you suddenly can't come to work today, is there a central place where people can find information about your projects, about where things are? And I think that's an important, so it's not something that people would maybe naturally have. But if you're having kind of intermittent or upcoming personal challenges, it is fairly likely that you would be called out without notice. So taking these steps to prepare in advance. So in my case, for example, I was extra conscious of making sure that any status reports that I had were in a cloud-based tool that everyone had access to and not on my hard drive. That people knew who my backup was for each of the projects that I was working on. Making sure that the people that I was designating as my backup knew not only where to find resources that related to that project, but also what the current issues were. And, and some of this I didn't do on a daily basis, but I built up this structure of support by being deliberate about having that backup in place and having someone, kind of on standby. And it ended up, because I was in a leadership position at the time, it also ended up being a great development opportunity for them, kind of coincidentally.
We have a couple follow-up questions on this same topic. So when you say coworkers, do you mean managers or others you support?
Both, really. And it's up to you. And that was that first comment I made when I was talking about getting this out in the open. Often these things are deeply personal. If you're dealing with a personal crisis, that's personal, right? And so it's up to you to determine how comfortable you feel and how much you want to share. So in my case, I mentioned I had a really large team. I only told the people that were on my management team about my modified schedule, for example. I didn't tell all 150 people, don't expect to see me on Thursday. I told my managers that we'd have to work around this through the summer while I focused. So I chose the path of only telling people to the extent that the information would help them or that not having the information would affect them. So yes, my manager, and in my case, I also had managers working for me that I also shared with. And then I had some friends at work that I told just because we were close and because I just needed that kind of emotional support and spent a lot of time at work. So totally personal decision how many people you share with. Share at least enough so that your manager can understand what's going on with you and help you get the support you need.
That last comment is perfect for the next question, which is, when it is deeply personal, do you have any tips for how you can address it with your boss or your manager?
I don't think they need to know details beyond what will help them support you. So for example, if you've got some, deeply personal health issue, all you need to say is, I'm having a health issue. I'm working on it with doctors. It's going to require some treatment. I expect it to affect my schedule in the following ways, or I need this kind of support, or I plan to apply with HR for this type of leave. So one, only share as much as you need to. They don't need to know the details, of what's going on, especially if you don't have the relationship that makes that feel natural. I'm having a health issue. I'm having, my parents need my support, and there's no alternative besides me being there for their doctor's appointments, whatever it is. Only share enough so that they know. When I say that, like health issue, for example, the type of issue does depend in some cases, or does affect what types of support is available for you. So Family Medical Leave Act has very clear and documented requirements for how it applies and for whom it applies and how you are eligible. And so they'll need to know enough to know whether you're eligible. And honestly, HR will probably do the formal evaluation of that. So I tended to err on the side of less details and more implications. This is happening, therefore X, Y, Z.
When you went into your sort of negotiation conversation with your employer, if they had negatively viewed your ask for work adjustment, would you have left? What were some of the other ideas that you had thought of?
I'm smiling because as I was thinking about this slide and talking about this slide, I did not have a backup plan for that conversation. Generally, when I go into any kind of negotiation, I have my bottom line, I have my fallback positions, and in this case, I was just such a mess that I just went in with the ask. I would recommend thinking through that if you have the presence of mind, but if you've got something really big going on, you just might need to just go in there and get it out and ask for help and be vulnerable. And that's kind of what I did, and it worked out well for me. It may not always work out that way. So if you can think about what's your alternative, your bet, no, then yeah, I would think about what the alternative was. In my case, I didn't. I just was in such a the second time that I had this conversation, so the first time I had this kind of conversation was when my mom had the stroke and was recovering. The second time I had this conversation was my dad was in hospice and was declining, and in that case, I would have left. If I had not been able to, at the time I was working for a company that had unlimited PTO, and they actually meant it, so that was unbelievable. Not everybody's in that situation, but I would have left and figured out something on the fly if I wasn't able to get the time I needed in that situation. So, but yeah, I would recommend having an alternative than going in on the fly like I did that first time.
And who would have been good to include in your support network in dealing with aging parents?
One thing that I would recommend now that I didn't take advantage of at the time, a lot of employee assistance programs give access to geriatric care managers, and sometimes your employer will sponsor 2 or 3 hours of consulting with a geriatric care manager. And a geriatric care manager has a broad range of skills and generally is very deeply local, so they will know resources in your area. So what are the, if you need to hire a caregiver, or if you need to move your parents out of their home, those are the kinds of things that they'll be able to quickly say, oh, these are 3 great options for you, and therefore save you like 60 hours of research. So that's one that I would include. And I also needed an accountant and a financial advisor and an attorney, all 3 at different times. And so having people that I could call with questions was also really important.
Looking back at your list of 10 things, there's a couple questions on what techniques or strategies might we use to sort of be more positive in our view of self and expecting good things and working towards these goals. How might we change? Do you have any techniques for how we might change our mental thoughts and our worldview?
Right. Well, on the taking a positive view of yourself, one technique that worked for me was, let's say I would express some negative thought, and the one question to ask yourself is, okay, great. You think they think that about you. What is the evidence? We're all University of Chicago. What's the data? Where's the data to support your assumption? And very often I could find no data. I had just this feeling that was filling up my whole head, but no data. So look for evidence, and if you find evidence, great. That's feedback. Take it, adjust, and move on. So that's something that's helped me in terms of positive view of yourself. Expecting good things. Sometimes I play the opposite game. So if you think thing is a certain way, be the devil's advocate for yourself, or find someone who can take the complete opposite view. And that's been helpful for me to kind of play these little thought games. And in some cases, they're really profound that, yes, you can create. I'm sure some of you have a debate background. And out of 52 people, maybe there's an attorney on the line. This idea of sort of taking the opposite view can start to build that skill of, oh, maybe there is another way to look at it. Maybe I can turn this into a positive. Any more there?
You mentioned medical help and sort of professional help. Who else did you include in your network of support when dealing with your aging parents or other life events?
My husband was a great support, and one of the best things the best ways that he supported me was finding a way to make me laugh. He's good at that. So finding someone who could make you laugh, I think, is important. Somebody who knows you really well and who's seen you over time and who's seen you go through things before can help remind you give you that perspective that you might lose when you're in a crisis, that really all things change, right? And so somebody who can help you realize how things change over time and how things have changed for you over time, and how you've been through things in the past. So I think those two, kind of from a personal perspective, have been super helpful. And then, Dr. Google has been very helpful, although his bedside manner is terrible. So I find educating myself on an issue is often really helpful. And for aging parents, I try to rely on government sources because they're not as biased as a lot of the other sources you might find. And there's a ton of it out there. So that's something I came to over time, rely on government sources for both access to resources, but also information to educate myself. So that's been helpful too.
Someone asked, how have you been able to navigate the smaller crisis within the big crisis of your life, which is young children and childcare?
Well, we had childcare that was, kind of reliable. It was they were young enough that they weren't in school, which in some ways was helpful because that meant that they were, they had a place to be for, 8+ hours a day. So that was helpful to me. Yeah, if they were also having all these random Chicago public school days off at the time, I would also that would have been a little bit much to manage. But honestly, I found a lot of relief in coming home and having kids around helped me maintain perspective. And so while the sleep deprivation kind of hurt and was kind of painful at times, just the fact of having for me, it was a great source of comfort and gave me perspective as opposed to a source of crisis. Even though there were challenges, it was more just like, this I can do. It was a lot less emotionally challenging than all the things that my parents needed because they were my parents. With kids, it was just kind of like, all right, give me a problem like this all day long compared to the problems that I was having with my parents. So that's what I would say on that.
How did you make time for yourself in this crisis? There's a lot of work you've talked about, a lot of now childcare, a lot of things with your parents.
So, two things. One, I got really, really good at time management, and I also set expectations at work. I set a really clear boundary that if I wasn't at work, I'm not checking email. You can call me, I will answer, and I will respond. But you got to make that call. I'm not going to monitor just in case. And so that is where I lost that habit altogether of working when I'm not at work. And yeah, I did get calls sometimes, and I was happy to get on my computer and handle something, but people had to call me, and I let them know that. So setting a boundary was really important. And then as far as getting time for myself, I kind of cheated in the sense that I would take it in the middle of the day at work. So I would adjust my work day and just take a quick break. Like maybe I would go, out to lunch with a friend or schedule, kind of a massage or something during the workday. So I didn't have to negotiate, time off with my time off. Didn't have to negotiate with anybody. I could just, add a couple hours to my workday, but take it out of the middle. So that helped me, and it was just easier in some ways than trying to balance outside of work with my own family and my parents. Maybe one more if there is, and then we can move on.
How do you triage working on multiple issues that all hit at once? This person's example is divorce, maybe a parent needing a lot of help, children falling apart. When all of these things hit you at once, how do you triage and choose what to deal with?
Mm-hmm. In cases like that, when I'm just kind of feeling overwhelmed, I try and clear my mind. I just try and clear my mind and then when, maybe meditate for a minute and see what rises to the top. And, you can try and do it by, impact of inaction. Like if you don't take an action, what will the impact be? But in a case like you're talking about, maybe all three are equal impact, or it just seems like a silly exercise because they're all important. So in those cases, you just need to start, and the only way out is through. So I think I should probably conclude. What do you think about that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks, guys. These are great questions. I really appreciate the interest. The last thought I'd have, I don't know if you've noticed along the way, a lot of the techniques here are rely on thinking techniques. These are about changing the way that your mind works and the way that you react to things. And so one of the psychologists talk a lot about locus of control and this idea of, do you have an internal or an external locus of control? And that means, do you think that things happen to you? That's an external locus of control, or by you? That's an internal locus of control. Research focused on resilient children identified that they saw themselves as the orchestrators of their own destiny and their own fate. And on a scale that measured locus of control, they were more than 2 standards of deviation away from the standardization group. So changing your locus of control from external to internal leads to positive changes in your own well-being and objective work performance. So perception is the key to resilience, this idea of having an internal locus of control that you are in charge. So I wish you the best of luck in taking some of these, applying them to your lives, and I hope you found this was useful. I do speak on other topics. I talk to corporations about life transitions, about resilience. I offer several sort of key topics and do custom topics there. I also talk about aging in place and caregiving, and provide resources in community and faith-based organizations. So if you thought any of this was interesting or know of an organization who might be interested, my contact information is here. You can find me at lifeinmotionguide.com. And thanks again for joining today. Enjoy the rest of your day.
And just before we let you go, Karen, would you share a little bit about your book?
Sure. My book is actually it's intended to help people get their affairs in order. So one of the things that really kind of made me nuts when I was with my parents was that I had all the emotional work of adjusting to the changes in our world, and I also was dealing with all these annoying practical details like, where's the garage key, or what types of property do you have, what accounts do you have, where are they? So it's a workbook to help people get their affairs in order, and that's also available on my website. So thank you.
And real quick, one person said, do you have any other recommended books or things to think or resources they should look for? I haven't read the book. I've looked a lot at the website. One website I would look at if you're having a personal challenge is optionb.org. It's Sheryl Sandberg's nonprofit, and there's a lot of really great resources for different types of personal challenges, and I've really been impressed with what they've done in a short amount of time. So I would look at optionb.org as a recommendation for sure. Great. Thank you everyone for participating, and a special thank you to Karen for sharing these practical tips and strategies for building resilience in our own lives. I invite you, all those who are attending, to join us again. Tomorrow evening, there is a webinar on career paths in publishing. And in 2 weeks, we're having one called Leadership Lessons from the C-Suite. If you're in the Chicago area, I invite you to come down for Alumni Weekend in Hyde Park, May 30th to June 3rd. There'll be faculty lectures, community events, and a great time. And the Careers Office is hosting a networking panel and light breakfast on June 2nd, featuring some of Chicago's most innovative entrepreneurs who are all UChicago alumni. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.